Hey, this is Mark Strigl of the Talking Metal podcast, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Ian McCurdy, and we have on the line the drummer of Kiss, Eric Singer. Eric, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Doing great.
Good.
Are you guys all stuffed up food-wise from the holidays, from Christmas going into New Year's here?
Yeah, I think I put on, I'm not even kidding, 10 pounds. I'm at my mother-in-law's, and it's just if you don't eat, it's, she gets offended. So it's, you have to eat. And it's good food. So, yeah, it's definitely putting on the pounds.
It's crazy. I know, it's crazy. It's like I try to always monitor and be good about it, but, man, it was like on Christmas Eve I went to some friends' dinner, and I just I don't think I got that stuffed feeling in a long time where, when you just feel so overly bloated stuff to the point where you almost feel like sick and you don't want to move.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I took it easy this week preparing for, because my friends are Italian. They always do all these big dinners for New Year's and New Year's Eve and day and Christmas Eve and day. So this family and friends of mine, they love to entertain. They do 4 big sit-down dinners during the holidays. So number 3 is tomorrow night. And so I'm trying to prepare.
Yeah, nice. So, hey, Eric, we wanted to get an update on Kiss from you, but before we do that, we wanted to dive a little into your history. And I remember first learning about you back when I was a teenager, when you basically replaced Bill Ward in the revamped version of Black Sabbath, and you ended up working on the 7th Star record with Tony Iommi and Glenn Hughes. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about, how you ended up as a member of Black Sabbath?
Yeah, well, it seems like it actually doesn't seem that long ago, but it really was over 30 years ago. I was playing with Lita Ford at the time, and she was engaged to Tony Iommi, and Tony had seen me play with Lita. I started just doing demos with him. And originally, he was doing some demos. He was producing Lita's demos. She was between records, so she was getting ready to work on a new record. And so Tony originally was producing those demos. And then he had seen me play her, so then he asked me to play on his stuff. And she had Lita's bass player, who was named Gordon Copley. So Gordon and myself were playing on the demos. And then as Tony got more serious, he decided, I think, that he really wanted to work on a record, and he had the idea of doing a kind of similar record like I did with Ronnie Montrose recently. There was a Montrose record that came out about a month ago called 10 by 10, where it was 10 songs with 10 different singers. Tony's idea was to have a bunch of different singers, and at that time, I remember he was talking about having Coverdale and Robert Plant and Glenn Hughes and all these different singers sing, 1 or 2 songs each or something like that. And but as we got along, as we moved along, when they had Glenn come in to sing, they liked Glenn's voice so much and thought it was so great, they just said, let's just have Glenn sing on the whole thing, and that's how that came to be. But originally it was supposed to be just a solo album. And while we were recording the record, in fact, stuff on YouTube somewhere, there's a version of The Thrill Is Gone with Lita singing, and then Tony does the solo, or one of the solos on it. It's on YouTube somewhere. I think if you look it up, probably could find it. It's pretty obscure, but there was a bunch of other songs, because at the time I think she was going to call her record The Bride Wore Black, was going to be the name of the album, and because she was engaged and to Tony Iommi and all that, so there was the kind of little connection to the title, and she actually had a song called that as well, called The Bride Wore Black. But anyways, Lita wanted to get working on her material, so she took Gordon, her bass player, back to start working on writing with her, and brought Dave Spitz in, and he ended up playing on the record. And so we did the record, and then Tony wanted to tour, and we had to ask us to be in the band, and the rest is history. But then Glenn, Glenn had personal and vocal issues, had just had issues going on at that time.
Right.
And Glenn only for 6 shows, and then you got Ray Gillen, who ended up in Badlands. We ended up in Badlands together with Jakey Lee, but Ray Gillen was found by actually Dave Spitz had seen him playing in a club band, which goes to show you that people actually do get discovered just by playing in a band locally, and somebody sees them and poaches him out of the situation. That's exactly what happened with Ray. Somebody had seen him playing in the club band with Bobby Rondinelli. He had a band called Rondinelli with Bobby Rondinelli, the drummer, who also played in Sabbath. So, anyways, he saw Dave Spitz had seen him, and I think he had a girlfriend that took vocal lessons from the same vocal teacher, and they got his number, and he came out and sang with us at a sound check, and that was it. The rest was history. We said, this guy's the guy.
So Glenn was already out, and you were looking for a second singer?
No, Glenn was not. We were looking for a singer. Glenn was already singing because it was very obvious right from the rehearsal time frame that Glenn was not up to the task. I don't think he was prepared to just be the lead singer in a band. Glenn always plays bass and always played bass and sang. Whether he was second lead singer or main singer, he's always done that. And he didn't even realize that he wasn't going to be playing bass because he got there and here's Dave Spitz, playing bass, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't even know I wasn't going to play bass." And it was just so. Looking back, it was kind of funny because it's like he didn't even seem like he was prepared for the whole situation. He's a great singer and he's a really nice guy. It was just bad timing on his part. But that was like, I always tell everybody that was one of my really kind of going to school, if you will, the ropes about being in the music business, crash course, because we had Don Arden, manager, Sharon Osbourne, Ozzy's wife's father. He was the manager. So I had a real crash course into like dealing with the music business on many levels, managers, just all the shenanigans that goes on behind the scenes. And I have to say it was quite a learning curve in those formative years. But now at the time it was kind of frustrating and confusing. But looking back, it's kind of funny. I can laugh at it all because there's some crazy stuff that happened, and I was just like, wow, you can't believe it. But it's amazing what goes on,
Yeah.
And especially when you add drugs and alcohol to the situation, that really fuels it to be even more chaotic.
Right on. No, so Ray is in Sabbath. You guys are doing shows with him, and it's from the way the history books are written, you actually record the Eternal Idol album with Ray, but then at some point he's out and Tony Martin comes in and re-records all his parts. That okay? Well, that's basically the short version, but I'll try to give it a more accurate but still simplified version. After we got Ray Gillen as a singer, then the band kind of really did become more cohesive sounding, and the band sounded really good. Once we got our sea legs, as the old saying goes, and got tight, and Ray got comfortable and knew the lyrics and knew what he was singing. We did some shows over in England, did a tour of England, and the band was sounded really good. So we ended up, Tony wanted to just go right in and do a new record and start, basically start fresh with this lineup. And we were in Birmingham for a few months doing a bunch of demos, and then he switched managers. And then it was decided that we were going to record at Air Studios Montserrat, which is the studio owned by, well, it's not there anymore, but it was owned by George Martin. But it was a famous studio in the West Indies. Very small, remote island, but really beautiful location and a really cool studio. I was there for 6 weeks. It was a great experience. And so we went there and worked on the record. And during that time, we switched bass players to Bob Daisley. So then that looked like it was going to be the new lineup. So we did all the tracks, and then after we were done with the basic tracks, they went to London to work, and I went back to LA. And it just kind of gone. There was a lot of stuff going on. So Bob Daisley was being a band, but Bob had a few years. So Bob called me up one day and said, I didn't work with the manager. And then he called me up and said, hey, Gary Moore needs a drummer. I told him about you. You want to audition? So I flew over to London and auditioned for the gig. So I ended up quitting the Sabbath gig to go play with Gary Moore with Bob Daisley. And so now they were down to just Tony and Ray Gillen. And then Ray, while he was in London working on the record, he had met up with John Sykes.
and Cozy Powell, and Sykes was starting that band Blue Murder, so Ray quit to go play with John Sykes, which was the very original version of Blue Murder, was with Cozy Powell on drums and with Ray Gillen singing in the beginning, and Tony, what's his name, Tony Franklin on bass. But then I guess the label Geffen and Sykes decided that John wanted to sing instead. So Cozy Powell quit because of that, because he thought they wouldn't find a better singer, from what I was told. So Cozy quit, and they got Carmine Peace, and it ended up as a trio, the version of Blue Murder that we all know. But for a short, maybe about a half a year, Ray was working in that version of the band. So that's when they brought Tony Martin, had him just re-sing everything. And then later on, when I was on tour with Gary Moore, Jake E. Lee came to one of our shows, and by that point he was already out of Ozzy, and I knew he was going to put a new band together, and I told him about Ray at that time, because people always tell the story that Ray Gillen's mother called up Jake and left a message, and that's how Ray hooked up with Jake. Well, that's true, but Ray's mother called, but Ray flew out to L.A. and was staying at my apartment, because with the intention of trying to get together and jam with Jake E. Lee. But I'm the one that actually told Jake about Ray Gillen when he came to one of our Gary Moore shows in Southern California, and said, "Hey, I heard you're going to put a band together. We should get together and jam. And I know this really great singer." And eventually, a few months later, Ray came out, and we did finally jam with him. And I remember the first time we jammed together, it was actually Juan Crocier from Rat. His brother played bass the first time we ever got together and jammed.
Wow.
He's also a bass player as well. I forget his name, his first name, but I know it was Juan's brother. I think he's Juan's older brother. But Jake knew him from the San Diego area, because Jake had been in Rat at one point earlier, and Warren DeMartini replaced him. There's a lot of lineage there between all these people. Music is very incestuous, as we all know.
Right.
And there's a lot of nepotism. People hire their friends, always, I guess that's true in all walks of life when you think about it.
So how did Greg end up in Badlands to finish the 4 to do the album?
Jake brought him in.
Okay.
Jake knew him from, I guess he had auditioned for Ozzy, was the story I was told. And Jake and him became friends. So Jake, we auditioned a bunch of different people, but Jake wanted him in the band. So, it was one of those things, like I said, people hire their friends. And we all do that, So if you have a job and you need somebody, first thing you do is call one of your friends if they're looking for a job and go, "Hey," Or, I've done that many times myself. Been in bands and you need somebody. I remember in Kiss, when we needed a keyboard player, and Gene asked me, "Do you know anybody?" And I called up Derek Sherinian, because we had just played together in Alice Cooper, and I said, "Hey, Derek, you want to do this gig?" And he came down, and that was it. So we all hire our friends.
Can you tell us about the recording process of the first Badlands album?
We went into the record plant in Los Angeles to do a bunch of demos. And we did some of those demos, but then I think the label that we were already signed. We had just gotten signed, and so then we went in to go and record. Then we wrote some more material. Then we actually went to do the record for real at the end of '88. A few months later at One on One, which is in North Hollywood here. It's pretty close to my house, actually. It's in the NoHo Arts District. That's a really great studio, and we did the basic tracks there. But then after we did those tracks, the label wanted to hear a few other songs. They said, "We want to at least hear a couple of songs that we think could be, MTV/radio airplay," because everybody was doing videos, as you know. That was the big thing. So
right.
We wanted to make sure that we had some songs that they felt would be able to be promoted in that way. And the band was kind of at a crossroads, because some people in the band were open to saying, "Yeah, okay, fine, we got to do what we got to do to, you got to work with a label." When people my theory, or I should say my perspective or point of view, is if somebody gives you money to make a record, they're not giving you money, unless you're a jazz musician, they're not giving you money to just go and do whatever you want. But in the record business of rock and roll, and especially in that 80s time, people want something to produce results, meaning sales. They don't just give you a bunch of money to make whatever you want and hope it sells and go, yeah, go ahead. Here's $250,000. So there were some differences of opinion within the band of that point of view, I should say. And it doesn't mean that one or the other is necessarily wrong. It just means that you're not on the same wavelength. And I think there was a bit of problems there. Eventually it got worked out, and we ended up going. Ray and Jake went to New York to work on more songs, and so I flew to New York and did some more tracks. That's why, if you notice on the album, for those that are familiar, on the actual vinyl, or maybe it even said it on the cassette, I don't remember, or the CD, but it would say East Side, West Side, because we did half the songs recorded in New York and half the songs were recorded in California. So there's your East-West thing, and that was the reason for that, for those that didn't know, that little piece of senseless trivia. Eventually we did that, and the record came out, and we had, there was a good buzz, a very good buzz about the band. I mean, it's a shame that the band didn't do better in the long run, because the band had everything in place to be potentially successful. It's just that the band self-imploded, unfortunately, at least in my opinion.
Now, with that band, to me, that band always felt like you were a little ahead of the curve. I mean, there was still, I guess what we'd call, hair metal at this point going on in 1989, and yet it was before the grunge movement came in. But Badlands always felt like this band to me that was kind of bridging the gap between the 80s and the 90s, because you guys had more of a street attitude and sound. Is that something you were kind of conscious of back in the day, or was that just something that happened?
I think that was, partly because the band kind of started first jamming in late '87 when we first started putting the whole thing together, and then by the beginning of '88, that's when we had the final lineup, with the 4 people. So we spent that, first, 8 or 9 months of '88, just figured out what we were doing. There's some of the earlier, which on YouTube, there's some demos of the original early Badlands songs. I think there's about 6 songs that never appeared on any Badlands albums. Some rough demos that are on YouTube. If somebody searches that out, you can find it. And some of those songs were really cool. I liked them because it was heavier. It was more of a Black Sabbath, Ozzy style, but, which is what I liked, because that's what was going on at the time. But we all really liked 70s, 60s into early, especially 70s, early 70s type hard rock, blues-based stuff, Humble Pie and Grand Funk Railroad, and, of course, Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and that kind of stuff. We liked all that music that we were influenced by. So that's, I think, what you heard stylistically was all those influences. And we used to play a lot of cover songs live from other bands. I remember we used to play a Grand Funk song. Trying to remember the name of the song. But we used to do, cover song. We used to do in Hendrix and stuff like that. We used to always throw 1 or 2 cover songs in when we play live. To show we were wearing our influences on our sleeves, as the saying goes. But so that we were, that we just decided, this is what we want to do. We want to play. That's why we weren't dressing all flashy and glammy and kind of more, I would say, quite jeans and a t-shirt, but more definitely heavily influenced by that Led Zeppelin, Humble Pie style look and sound. And that was, I would say, it happened organically. It was also a concerted effort, I would say, in some parts of, because we just decided, hey, we're just going to play that kind of music that we want to play. But like I said, the big differences is that some of us wanted to still be mindful of the fact that we had a label and people that had, invested in us and expected also a certain amount of cooperation, if you will, of trying to be, having some bit of commerciality. And I think that was always a struggle, because from what I understand, after I was out of the band, which I was out after the first album, that the, that those struggles and differences of opinion continued on, meaning Ray himself, because I think Ray always wanted the band to be able to be commercially viable. Because bottom line, pop. People sometimes say, "Well, I don't like pop music." All pop means is popular. Pop just stands for popular, and the bottom line is, if you're popular, that means a lot of people like you, and it means people buy your records and want to hear you on the radio and all that stuff. So to be successful and to keep it all going, you have to have a certain amount of popularity, and unless you want to be just a starting artist and play jazz, then that's cool. And I would totally respect those type of musicians. If that's what you want to do, I think it's cool. Then go, but you have to also mind. Yeah, I think you can't have it both.
Right on.
Artistic and just be like a jazz-minded guy. Say, I'm just going to play the music I want, and I don't care what anyone thinks. I think I totally respect people that feel that way. But you can't expect people to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars and support you on tours to just go and do whatever you want if it's not selling. It's not producing, then you have to be willing to compromise. I believe you have to compromise if you expect people to invest in you and give you a bunch of money. Experience has proven me right.
Right on. Around this time, I guess it's a little later, 1989, you end up doing the Paul Stanley solo tour, which I saw at City Gardens in Trenton, New Jersey, and that really seemed like the first time to me that Paul, in a number of years, started to embrace the 70s era Kiss songs, because when I saw them on Animalized and the Crazy Nights tour, there weren't a lot of old Kiss songs in the set, but when he played that tour, he was really Come On and Love Me and going back to these songs that we hadn't heard in a number of years. Is that how you remember it? Do you remember him kind of embracing his past a little bit more on that tour for the first time in a while?
Well, I can't comment completely on that because I wasn't looking at or analyzing any of that stuff from a Kiss fan perspective. And believe me, I know how Kiss fans can be. They micro-analyze every aspect of what that band does, pretty much. And everybody, it's amazing how some people really think they know what the band is doing and why. Like, they really think they have the inside track or they have the perspective, which is actually pretty funny and entertaining at times, to be honest with you. But I don't think, I can't tell you if Paul had that. I think the main premise of him doing it was like, this is me playing solo, so I'm doing all the material that I wrote or co-wrote, and I want it to be a little different sounding. In other words, why go out and play Kiss songs to sound just like Kiss plays them exactly the same? In other words, he didn't tell us, hey, I want you to go, here's the live tapes of Kiss, I want you to play it like this, because, you got to play it so it sounds like Kiss. He, I think on purpose, that's why I kind of went crazy at times.
Hey, Eric, I want to ask you about the Bill Ward record that you worked on with Ozzy Osbourne was on that record. Ward 1 along the way kind of has become a cult classic. And, you went from playing with Tony and Black Sabbath, and then suddenly the iconic drummer of Black Sabbath is having you play on his solo record. How did that all come about?
Bill came to, I'm not sure if he was friends with Bob Daisley. I think that's what it was. We were playing with Gary Moore, and we were playing some shows in Southern California. So that would have been like the fall of '87. And Bill came to one of our shows with some friends of his, and I think he had already asked Bob to play on his record, is what happened. Because Bob had played with, because Zakk Wylde was on it also. And Zakk and Bob had done, trying to remember, did Bob know Zakk yet? Because, I think Zakk just joined the band around the end of '87 because Bob went and played on No Rest for the Wicked.
Right.
I remember after the Gary tour ended, Bob stayed in L.A. and then he started working with Ozzy on that record and recorded it because Bob would stay at my house a lot of times. And so Bill came to one of the Gary Moore shows and he asked Bob, I think, to play on his record. And then after Bill saw me playing with, Bill knew I was a big Sabbath fan. I mean, the funny thing is, I have to say, not to change the subject, but a lot of the bands I played with, I was a big fan of growing up. Like, they were in my formative years. I was very influenced by Sabbath and Kiss, and those kind of bands. Brian, Queen, playing with Brian May, all these people I got to work with. I was a huge fan of all these bands. So, Bill's like one of the nicest guys. He's a super gracious, mellow guy. And so, Bill, it was kind of surreal. I'll admit, Bill asked me to play on his record, but I think Bill had this one chaotic song that he wanted me. It was the opening track actually on the record, and it was like a double bass song. And at the time I was playing a lot of double bass, so I think that's why Bill wanted me. I think Bill has like a very creative mind, and he's one of these people. When he has a point of view, he sees the imagery in his mind's eye of how he wants something to sound. And so he starts thinking, okay, I want that guy to play on it, and I'm going to do this and that on the song to make it get to the eventual result that I hear in my head. And so Bill had me do that track, and then he had me do some overdubs on another song. I think it was called Pink Clouds, with just some tom-tom. I played tom-toms with mallets. I'm trying to remember if it was my idea to do it, or I think I was there, and Bill goes, why don't you just go ahead and play on it? So it was like really cool experience working with him in the studio because he's a really creative guy. I mean, I'm a huge Sabbath fan, so mind you, I'm going to be a little bit biased. I always thought all those guys were really, really creative and very talented, uniquely, they created that unique sound between Geezer, Bill, Tony, and Ozzy. And each one of them deserves the same fair amount of credit. I know Tony wrote, most of the riffs, and I know Geezer wrote the lyrics. But Ozzy comes up with the melodies. People sometimes want to try to take away from what Ozzy does, and I think that's really, people aren't quite, I don't think they're quite accurate with their knowledge of what Ozzy does bring to the table. They think because Ozzy didn't maybe write the riff, or doesn't write all the lyrics, I know Bob Dickie wrote most of the lyrics of the times, the records he was on, but Ozzy comes up with those melodies. Those are Ozzy's melodies. And his melodies are great, and they're almost like they have a pop sensibility. You can really hear that he was greatly influenced by the Beatles when you listen to Ozzy's melodies because they're so melodic, and he has such a pop sensibility in this heavy music. I think Ozzy's much underrated when it comes to that creativity that he brings to the songs. And I'm not trying to be an Ozzy homer. I just think that people want to discount the fact that just because he didn't write all the lyrics or the riffs, that somehow he didn't do anything. It's like, songs is a big part of the songs. Obviously, is the lyrics and melody, or as well as the riff. But without that melody, Ozzy writes all those melodies. No doubt about it. He's very talented.
Because I know whenever Randy Rhoads was playing with Ozzy, I know for a fact that Ozzy would hum a bar to him, and then Randy would play it.
Yeah. Well, Bob told me that. Well, I don't know about that, but Bob told me that when Ozzy sometimes would say, he told me, like, for example, Ultimate Sin. Now, Jake didn't play on Ultimate Sin. I'm sorry, Bob did not play bass on Ultimate Sin, but he wrote the lyrics for all the songs except for Shot in the Dark, which Phil Soussan wrote. But Bob told me that Ozzy they'd send him tapes, and he'd sit out in his garden at home and listen to the tapes and then write lyrics. And sometimes Ozzy would say, I have a title, Thank God for the Bomb. And he said that was Ozzy's title. Ozzy said, I want to write a song about Thank God for the Bomb. So Bob wrote the lyrics, but it was Ozzy's concept and his title of the song. So the point is, you can't say that, like, everyone automatically wants to think that he didn't, contribute. It's like, well, even if it doesn't matter if he didn't write any lyrics on certain songs, he still came up with all those melodies. That is clearly, you ask anybody that worked with him, they'll tell you Ozzy came up with those melodies. So, but the point I was getting back to was Bill Ward. Bill was also a very creative guy. I always thought that Bill had a very much of a Pink Floyd type influence to his kind of solo material. I always thought that solo he did was a combination, sounded like a Black Sabbath meets Pink Floyd style of music.
I guess it was after the Bill Ward record. I mean, there's just so much stuff going on in your life around this time period. But you end up in Kiss, replacing Eric Carr for the Revenge record.
Well, I played with that, but I did Alice Cooper for a couple of years before that.
Okay.
So forgetting that, I joined Alice after I was in Badlands. I got basically fired. So and right after that, I remember I got fired in the beginning of 1990. And what first thing I did is I just started calling everybody I knew in the business to try to figure the best thing to do is just pick up and move on. And I remember I called a bunch of people just seeing if anybody knew about any gigs. And I called, ironically, Doug Goldstein, who was the man. Well, he became the manager of Guns N' Roses.
Yeah.
But Doug was working for their management at the time. And he told me, Alice, they were on tour. He was out road managing Great White, and they were opening for Alice Cooper. And he said, hey, I'm on tour with Alice right now, and he needs a drummer. I'll tell him about you. And so Doug's the reason how I ended up, in Alice's band. He got me the audition. He basically told me about the gig and got me an audition.
Oh, awesome. I love Doug. He's actually a friend of mine. He's a great guy. Great guy.
Yeah, Doug. Doug was. Here goes to show you, like I said, when people hire their friends and always recommend and refer each other, Doug was the security guard on the Black Sabbath tour for us in '86. So that's how I met Doug. He was doing security at the time. And so Doug's one of those guys that I saw go from a security guard working for management to becoming a manager of like a huge band in a very short time. But Doug was always cool. I always got along really good with Doug, and I never worked with him after that Sabbath time, but I always, I've crossed paths with him here and there over the years. But I know he was good friends with Alice. That's how he basically was instrumental in getting me at least the opportunity.
Right on. Cool. And how well did you know Eric Carr before joining Kiss? Were you friendly with him? Did you know him? You did not know him.
I did not know Eric at all. I had never, other than when I met Eric on Paul Stanley's solo tour. He came to the one gig when we played the Ritz. And then I remember on the Hot in the Shade tour when they played Long Beach Arena, I went to that show.
Right.
And other than that, never. And it was always very like, hi, how you doing? Nice to meet you, that kind of thing. I didn't know Eric otherwise.
Right on. And you did some playing with Brian May for a while too. Can you talk a little bit about how you ended up? I mean, it's just mind-boggling. Tony Iommi, Kiss, Alice Cooper, Queen, Brian May from Queen. How did you end up playing with Brian?
Well, it's funny because I had met Brian. Actually, the first time I met Brian was back in the 80s when we were working on the Black Sabbath stuff with Tony. I remember going to dinner with him a couple times right across the street from Cherokee Studios on Fairfax Boulevard. And Brian was with his whole family. At that time, he was married to his first wife, and his kids were all real small. And I remember we went to dinner because he was good friends with Tony, and he still is. They've been really good friends for, probably 40 years. So I was actually, the way I heard about the the Brian May thing, I was over in Europe appearing at these Kiss fan expos, and one of the fans told me, I heard Brian May on the radio. He said he needs a drummer. I got hold of Brian May's manager. I called up this woman, answered the phone, and she said, is your number, so she read my number off. I'm like, yeah, how'd you get my number? She said, Tony Iommi gave your number to Brian and recommended you. So ironically, wow. Tony had referred me to Brian. I guess she said, he gave Brian your number and somebody else's number. She said another drummer. And so she said, okay, well, Brian's out doing press promo right now, but he's going to audition people, and we'll have you come over and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, then in the interim, Alice Cooper camp called me up and asked me to come back and fill in because Jimmy DeGrasso, who was playing drums with Alice, was going to go play with Megadeth. And they said, guys, I think something happened to Nick Menza's knee or something at the time, if I remember.
Okay.
So Jimmy went to go play. He was going to go and fill in, which he ended up joining the band, but he ended up replacing Nick. But he was originally going out to fill in, and they told me that I was just going to fill in for Jimmy for a couple of months while he was doing that. So in the interim, I went and auditioned for Brian May and got the gig. So then I ended up, I did most of Alice's touring that summer. Then I left to go play with Brian and did the Brian May tour for the rest of the year. And then I ended up coming back. Alice, they called me back up because the drummer they had to fill in for me after I left, they only did a handful of shows, but Alice wasn't happy with that. So they asked me to come back, and I ended up basically back in Alice's band and stayed with Alice up until the last tour I did with Alice was 2008. But I did a total of, I think, 13 tours with Alice, or 13 years mixed and matched over time of playing drums for Alice.
Yeah, I went to the House of Blues in Myrtle Beach to see Alice Cooper play. And I remember telling my friend, I was like, Eric Singer used to play with Alice Cooper. And we went in and you were playing. I was like, well, look at that. He's back.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is I was in and out. You know, I got to say, Alice is a great guy. And I love Alice. He's always been very cool. Was always very nice to me and very accommodating, because he knew there's times where when I went back to play with Kiss in 2001, but I still kept playing with Alice. And then in 2014, 2004, Kiss did like that Rock the Nation tour. So I ended up just not playing with Alice that year, and Tommy Clufetos came in because he was playing with Ted Nugent opening for us the year before, and so everybody liked him. They said, let's get that guy. So Tommy ended up starting to play with him. Then Tommy got the Rob Zombie gig, so they called me to come back. So in 2005, I was back playing in the band again, and Kiss really wasn't. Kiss didn't play that much in 05, 06, 07. Kiss only did a handful of shows each one of those years. So I ended up just playing with Alice, and then 2008, Kiss started touring like full on again, and I actually did both tours that year. But I was to be honest with you, I was so wiped out by the end of the year. I remember that really wearing me out. I was like, I can't do this. It's too much. I got to just do. And I knew Kiss was going to stay busy and keep working. So, and Alice knew it too. And I was like, yeah, he understood that it made sense for me to play with Kiss, because it was a more, with Kiss is more of Alice is a solo artist. Let's just put it that way. And Kiss is a band. So, Alice knew that, hey, it's a better situation for Eric, more lucrative, and it's a unique thing. He knew that Kiss, in that situation, the fact that I sing a lot, I'm more integral to what Kiss does than what Alice does.
Right on. Now, it's been 20 years since the release of Carnival of Souls, which was kind of a weird release because, it had been bootlegged and the band was already back with Ace and Peter. How do you look back on that record 20 years after its release?
Well, I got to tell you, I have mixed feelings. I know when we worked on that record, we did a lot of demos. Well, I know we did a lot of demos with Gene and Bruce Kulick and myself, because Gene, a lot of times would say, hey, let's go in the studio. Gene likes to work really more kind of old school way. He likes to just get in a rehearsal room or we'd go into a cheap demo studio and just go in there and blast ideas down and put it on tape. And sometimes Gene had this little cassette deck, and he would go home and he knew how to do his own little editing that worked, and it worked pretty seamless it was, mind you, it was a very primitive, poor man's way of doing it, but it was at least a way for Gene to do something that, because he's not savvy with technical stuff and Pro Tools or any of that type stuff. So this was a way for Gene to be able to at least work on material and ideas on his own. But, Gene was very into like just working on all kinds of riffs, and I know Bruce was very heavily involved. A lot of those riffs on that record is a lot of Bruce's riffs,
right?
And it's very indicative of the times. It's not like we were trying to be Soundgarden or Alice in Chains. I know there's people that obviously we were influenced by that, and I know some people it's interesting how some people don't think that it's right or okay for a band to be influenced by what's going around them at a given time. They think like, oh, well, you have your own sound, you should just do your own music. But the problem is, you can't make the same record over. In other words, Kiss can't make Dress to Kill over and over every year after year, or Destroyer every year. You have to, you make that record one time, and then you do whatever you do the next time you go in to record. And you can't help but be influenced by what you hear on the radio and what's going on around you. But I mean, it not only happens songwriting wise, it happens even playing wise. If you go to a concert and you see, for example, a drummer and he plays a certain way that you really like or identify with, you go home and you go, "Oh, I'm going to steal that lick that guy did. I thought he did this particular thing really kind of cool. I'm going to find a way to incorporate that into what I do, but I'll do it in my own way." And that's usually the key, is you try to take those influences and then spin it to where you make it sound like it's your version of it. And I think that's very, very common among many people. Some people don't listen to anything and just say, "Hey, I just play whatever I play and whatever comes out of me." And there's that mindset as well. But I think anyone that goes and sees shows and listens to any music on the radio that's popular at a given time, you can't help but be somewhat influenced by it, because you're hearing it every day pretty much.
Right. Definitely. And so at that point, you're out of Kiss, or you're at least not in the public eye with them for a good 5 years, it seems like, and then maybe 4.5. I'm not sure, but at some point in early 2001, I'm guessing you get the call that there's this tour, and Peter's not going to do it. I guess it's an Asia-Australia tour. Were you surprised when they were suddenly like, "We need you to go out with us and Ace and come back into the band"? Was that a surprising call, or did you expect it?
Yeah, I thought it was I was kind of surprised, to be honest with you, because all of a sudden I got a call. I was actually in Japan, again, at a fan expo. It's funny how that happens. Anyways, my lawyer, I don't know what made me check in with him. I don't know what the reason. Oh, no, I know what it was. I was just checking my answer machine, and he happened to have called and left me a message to call him, because I was going from Japan over to Thailand. They had this special deal back at the time, this was in 2001. They had this deal that if you flew from mainland USA to Japan and back, round trip, you could just connect over to Thailand for free. You could just add that on as an extra trip. So one of the guys, Keith LaRue, of course, Ian.
Yeah, I was going to say, Keith told me this story.
That was Keith. So Keith goes, "Hey, Eric, we can go to Thailand for nothing. As long as you bought a round trip ticket from U.S. to Japan, you can piggyback on this free trip. We should go over there and just go on vacation." I'm like, "Okay, cool." So we just decided, it was free. You just had to book your hotel, but the flight was nothing. So we said, "Yeah, let's do it." So we added on, maybe about 4 or 5 days or something. And it was actually a very fun, cool trip. We saw some crazy stuff. So we decided to just go. We did. We saw these crazy. It was like, I remember going down like these banana boats down through the jungle, and we went to this like snake farm and this like weird place where they had these lions and cats and all bears and stuff. Like this, it was kind of a really primitive. I wouldn't call it a real zoo. It was like a real primitive form of a zoo. It's it was kind of surreal, some of the stuff.
It's so like, don't stop the boat. Keep going.
But we did stop the boat. The water, where I remember, was so dirty, and these little kids would be all along the way when you're going down the river. These little kids would be swimming in it, just like you would play in your backyard as a little kid. I guess it was commonplace. That's what they knew. But the water was so dirty, and these kids would be swimming in it. But I guess maybe they got immune to the bacteria and stuff, which I guess tends to happen. Anyways, so right before we were, it was literally the morning, getting ready to go to the airport to leave Japan to go to Thailand, and I said, "Well, I'm going to check my answer machine." And I had a message from my saying, "Call me right away. Kiss wants you." Was talking about you to come back and play with them. So I called and they said, "Yeah, they want you." I guess there was an issue with Peter, and they want you to play it. And I told him I'm just on my way to Thailand. He said, "Well, just go, and by the time you get back, I'll have everything sorted out." Because I remember asking him, "What makeup do they want me to wear, or what are they going to do about the makeup?" He said, "I don't know. They haven't decided, But I'm
Wow.
sure everything will be worked on by to get back. So in the beginning, mind you, this kind of, I think people, the old saying, you make it up as you go along. I think because of the fact that Peter couldn't agree to terms with them, they basically, I guess, came to the resolution that, well, if you're not going to do it, then we're just going to ask Eric Singer to come back and play, and that's what happened. So I don't think that they really knew how to deal with it regarding the makeup or anything. I don't think they ever, put it this way, they didn't think about it because it hadn't happened. So
Yeah.
it was like, make it up as you go along. And I remember them saying, well, they're not sure what they're going to do. They'll figure it out. And then I got home that week later, and I remember when I called my lawyer, he said, oh, they're just going to have you wear the cat makeup. And then that was it. And it was never it was never a big deal. I mean, it was no big deal was made of it, I should say. Obviously, some of the fans felt differently, but or even to this day feel differently. But to me, it was never a big deal. I don't get so emotionally connected to any situation like that. I just can't do that. To me, it's like I play drums. It's about making music, and it's the way I look at it. Maybe I'm more black and white about it, and but either way, they had me come into a studio like the next week and get with the costume people and get me fitted for the stuff, and then I remember we went to a photo session and they put the makeup. Paul and Tommy Thayer were there and showed me how to put the makeup on, and I did a photo session. And I remember Gene showed up later, and Gene's looking at me and they're just like, "Yeah, it looks fine, okay, it's okay." And then that was it. And we did a photo session, and then they sent that artwork of that photo of me to the promoter in Australia, because they told the promoter that Peter wasn't coming and Eric Singer was going to be replacing him and all that. And they actually went and changed all the posters. But my point is, they absolutely did tell everybody. They said it in interviews, and they told the promoter, and the promoter changed the artwork and everything, saying that Eric Singer's playing drums now. So for those that want to rewrite history or have revisionist point of view, that's what really happened.
Right. Cool. These are some great old stories, and I know we're going on an hour here, Eric. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I did want to at least touch upon some of the great stuff you have going on in modern times now. Can we talk a little bit about Ronnie Montrose? And I know you and Ricky Phillips and just a lineup of all-stars have come together to complete Ronnie Montrose' final album, 10 by 10. Can you talk a little bit about Ronnie Montrose and this how this album came about?
Well, I actually was playing with Ronnie in 2000 and I think 2002, 2003, around that time frame. Maybe was it even maybe a little 04? But I was playing some gigs with Ronnie, and I was a big fan of Montrose growing up. So for me, when I got asked to play with him, Chuck Wright from Quiet Riot was playing bass with him at the time, and Chuck said, "Hey, Ronnie needs a drummer. You want to play with him?" I was like, that was an easy yes, because I was so influenced by that first album and such a big fan. So I jumped at the opportunity because I just wanted to play those. I always wanted to be able to play those songs. So then Chuck ended up, I'm trying to remember if Chuck left to go back to Quiet Riot, I think. So he recommended Ricky Phillips, who's in Styx, and Ricky ended up joining the band. So then it was Ronnie, Ricky, and myself, and there was a couple different singers. In the times that I did gigs with Ronnie, he had two different singers working with him. I think Ronnie was always looking for the right guy vocally, because it was always a tough thing, I think. And Ronnie's, if you look through his history, he always was changing directions musically. He was always exploring different people to work with and play with and all that. So I think that was just kind of who he is. But he seemed to like that lineup of Ricky and myself. So he said, "Hey, I want to go do some music, and I want to record it, and I want it to be organic, like playing live in the studio, 2-inch analog tape, like old school way, no click tracks." So we ended up recording a bunch of music. And we had a singer that Ronnie was working with at the time, but Ronnie, after we had cut the basic tracks and Ronnie let the guy attempt to sing on the stuff, Ronnie wasn't happy with it. And he just said, "This isn't right." And then he just said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just ask a bunch of different people to sing on it. So he came up with the idea and the title called 10 by 10. So the original concept was going to be a record of 10 songs with 10 different singers. Well, then Ronnie got ill and ended up passing away. The record just kind of sat on the back burner, and Ricky decided that, he really wanted to finish that record for Ronnie. He thought there was a lot of cool material on it. A lot of the vocals were done. Ronnie had never done any of the solos, though, but all the basic tracks were there. So Ricky actually took on that crazy project of all that work and sorting through everything and got an engineer to. They eventually, so 10 by 10, instead of being 10 songs in 10 years, it became 10 singers, 10 different guitar players on the 10 songs. So the title never changed, and the basic concept never changed, except for now we ended up having guest lead guitarists as well. And Ricky took on that big task of finally finishing the project. I mean, that was really more of a labor of love and doing it to finish it as a tribute more to Ronnie, to be honest with you. It was never about anybody. Believe me, there's no money in these kind of things. There's no money. This is really, it's almost, I don't want to say a thankless job, because the thanks you get is knowing that you got to do something that was creative and you did it for somebody's legacy and somewhat as a tribute to them. So that's, to me, ultimately, that's what this was about.
Gotcha. And some great, guest stars on that record. Eric Martin, Edgar Winter, Sammy Hagar, Tommy Shaw, Glenn Hughes. It's mind-boggling how many people are involved.
Yeah. Mark Farner and Davey Pattison, who sang in Gamma. There's one song that's the song that Davey Pattison sings. It sounds to me just like it almost sounds like you're listening to a Gamma record. And there's times where whenever I was doing that material, I myself, from a personal point of view, I tried to channel a Montrose, that Montrose Gamma era vibe, if you will, because Denny Carmassi was the drummer in those bands, and he was a major, major influence to me as a drummer growing up. I loved Denny Carmassi's drumming. So I tried to wear a little of that influence on my sleeve, if you will, because it's cool when you get to work with some of these people, like I mentioned earlier, that you've been influenced by. And when you get to work with them, it's kind of surreal, to be honest with you. Because I remember going to a concert or, dropping the needle on those records as a kid, as a teenager. And then all of a sudden, or seeing them in concert, and all of a sudden you fast forward all these years, and all of a sudden you're on stage playing with the guy, and you're like, wow, this is kind of cool. So for me, I have to admit, I've been very, very blessed and very fortunate to get to work with so many people that I was really impacted by and influenced by.
Yeah. Wow. You've had such a incredible career, so many just big names you've gotten to play with, like you said. And if you're cool with this, to wind things up, I just wanted to get an update from you on KISS. There has been some, I guess I'd call them teases in the press. Gene has mentioned this new song, Your Wish Is My Command. Paul has been talking about if you guys do another record, it would need to be something different. Is there any definitive plans to start working on a new KISS record?
No, well, not that I've been told, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't start the process. To be honest with you, with KISS, anything, I always say never, as I've not only say, but based on my own experience, never say never when it comes to anything with KISS, because you never know what they may or may not do and what may or may not happen, or what the possibilities are. I know we just did the KISS Cruise, which was number 7, which was very cool. It was very, it was a really great one.
12 hours.
That's just my computer telling me the time. That cruise, they turned into like this kind of annual retreat, if you will. It's almost like people going on to a retreat up in the mountains to go and get purified or clarified, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. It's almost like that's how the KISS has become for a lot of people.
A religious experience.
Well, yeah, it's funny because we always have different bands on the cruise, but I think Paul said something to me, I think the last cruise or something. I think you learn every time you do something, you learn a little bit more about yourselves. You learn more about your fans and more about the situation. And, we've done 7 of these cruises. We're going to do the 8th one in 2018. one thing we realize is that it's not that Kiss fans don't like other bands or other music, but Kiss fans usually tend to be very, very, very zealous, and sometimes they're very one band. In other words, it's almost like a woman that marries her high school sweetheart, and all she's never known is her husband, and that's it. A lot of Kiss fans, that's how they feel about Kiss. They really don't care about other bands. Not that they don't like other music, but when they come on a Kiss cruise, they're there for Kiss and Kiss-themed stuff. So I think more and more we're realizing that it's cool to have all these other bands come on the cruise because we're fans of a lot of these bands as well, and we enjoy it. But ultimately, I think the fans want people that are connected to the band in some way and keep it more Kiss-themed because, after all, it's called Kiss Cruise. So if it was like a heavy metal cruise, you'd have, many type metal bands, and I could understand more diversity on those type themed cruises. But on a Kiss cruise, I guess it makes sense to have it just be about Kiss.
And you had Bob and Bruce Kulick on this last one. That was a great show. Very good.
Yeah, that
was very cool.
Mind you, I'm a little biased because I'm a big Todd Kearns fan, but I think in my opinion, the reason that was so successful was because of Todd singing.
Yeah, definitely.
Some of that material, it takes the right person to do that material and have it be to do it justice. And a lot of that material, especially the 80s Kiss, that stuff's really high key. Really high,
like
really
Who Wants to Be Lonely? He did a great job on that.
Oh, yeah. But the one I thought was good was, what was the one? Turn on the Night.
Yep.
I thought he did Turn on the Night great. I mean, look, I love a lot of I know some fans of Kiss, my favorite era of Kiss is the first three records. But I do love a lot of the 80s pop stuff because I love pop songs. So I love Journey and Foreigner and Bad Company and Boston, all those type of bands. I love all those bands. So for me, anytime somebody has good sing-along type melodies, even if it is somewhat a little poppy, I still dig it. And to me, a lot of those Kiss songs, like the ones we named, they have that type of element to them. So I like them. But I thought Todd Kearns was the secret weapon. I know all the fans were glad to see Bob and Bruce playing together and playing that material, but ultimately I think having Brent, Fitz, and Todd Kearns in the band, that's what made it really solid.
Absolutely.
And it made it come off a really good way. So
anybody listening, you can go to YouTube and check it out. Great. It's a great concert.
Yeah, they did. I thought it was really cool. I watched it. I mean, they only played one time, unfortunately. Bruce could only stay on the boat for a couple of days. He had a gig, so he had to get off at the first port. Otherwise, I'm sure that they would have. See, the premise on the Kiss cruise, every band plays three times. So, including Kiss, everybody plays three gigs in different venues, but everybody throughout the boat. Like we play on the deck, and then we play two shows indoors, and everybody else does something similar, but they play in three different locales usually, and three separate occasions. That's the basic format for anyone that plays on the Kiss cruise. You play three times.
Nice.
But we couldn't do it this year with Bruce because of that. So maybe in the future, they'll get Bruce to come back at and do another one, and where he can actually be more committed to be on the boat for the whole time and do the typical format of doing the three shows per artist, if you will. Cool. But I have no idea what the theme is or what the Kiss Cruise is kind of Paul Stanley's baby, if you will. Paul usually is the one that comes up with a lot of the ideas and the approach and the theme, if you will, of what we're going to do on a particular cruise. And then when it comes to the set list the band does, then that's usually where we all get involved and contribute to that. Tommy and myself and Gene, we all get together and figure out what we're going to play.
Nice. Yeah, it's great. You played the deep cuts. The Kiss fans really love that.
Oh, yeah, well, I like it too.
Nice.
Like the Oath, you played the Oath. That was great. And great.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of cool. I just think it's fun to play some different songs. I know a lot of people sometimes would suggest or wish that we would play some songs in a normal Kiss concert, and I agree to a certain point, but I also realize that if you play obscure songs in a Kiss show, it's almost like when you go see the Rolling Stones and they play all these hits, and then they'll go, okay, we're going to play a song off our new album, and then everyone sits down and nobody reacts and nobody does anything. And people almost act like they couldn't care less because they don't even know the songs. They just want to hear Honky Tonk Woman, Brown Sugar, Jumpin' Jack Flash, and all that stuff. So it's very difficult for bands that have been around for a long time, and I'm not making excuses to toe some kind of dialogue that maybe everyone thinks that Gene and Paul always say, but I think they're right. They're absolutely right on this one, and this is a problem for a lot of bands. They'll go and try to incorporate some new songs, but fans just, when a band doesn't get the reaction out of new material that they do out of old material, sometimes they start thinking, okay, people don't like it, I'm not going to play it. And they'll attempt it for a couple of shows, and then they usually end up taking it out of the set. And you see this happen quite a bit. Some bands will, like Iron Maiden, I think, maybe Metallica, I'm not sure, but I know Maiden will play a lot of new material, and they'll just keep it in there and go, hey, that's what we're doing. But they have some of those bands, I think, have a different type of hardcore audience as opposed to a band maybe like the Stones or Kiss.
Yeah, well, even Maiden, they've gotten a lot of flack in the press for playing too many new songs. I've heard a lot of people complaining about that, but yeah, you're totally right on.
There you go. And it's really it's almost like you can't win situation. You're going to have a handful of people that are happy that you did play some obscure or different material, and then you're going to get a bunch of other people that say, I don't know these songs. Where are they playing these songs I never heard before? And the average fan is not a diehard when it comes to most bands. I'm talking about music in general. Like I went to see Lady Gaga a couple weeks ago, and I'm not familiar with all her songs. I couldn't tell you, honestly, the songs she played, I knew a lot of them, but I don't know what songs she played, if any of them were obscure or what. I have no idea. I just went to see her show and her presentation from the theatrical and production point of view,
right.
And she's a great singer. That girl could sing. Like, she's the real deal. So I went to just see her because I think she's a real talent, and I wanted to see her production of how she presents, because I love big shows. I love a lot of, theatrical type stuff, lights and pyro and stuff like that. I like bands that are performers that really put on a show as opposed to just stand there and play music, which is fine. Some artists, that's what they do. Like when you go see the Eagles, you're not going to see a show. You're going because you want to hear those songs. And the Eagles have an amazing catalog of material to play. But they basically, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but they just stand there and play. There's no show to see, if you will.
Yeah.
And I'm more the, that's why I like Genesis, like early Genesis with Peter Gabriel, when he would be very theatrical and they had all these amazing lights and stuff. Same thing with Pink Floyd. Those bands, even though it was more artsy, there was a performance and a spectacle to what they did, more than just coming out on stage and playing the songs. So that's my point.
Gotcha. Well, Eric, we've been talking to you for an hour and 10 minutes. You have been so gracious with your time, and we just want to thank you so much for sharing all these great old stories and giving us an update on Kiss. And we're looking forward to everything you have coming up in the future.
All right, guys, thanks a lot. And as always, we, Happy New Year to everybody, to all our fans. And I know there'll be more new and good, exciting things for Kiss coming up in 2018. I can't say exactly what yet, but I know there's some things in the books and in the cooking in the books. I should say cooking in the kitchen,
right.
Or on the books, I have to say, for the future. But I think Kiss is like a shark. You just keep feeding and swimming and eating and surviving.
Yeah.
The shark never sleeps. It swim and eat forever. And I think that's, I got to tell you, I think I'll leave you with this thought. I think that's not a bad way to live. I don't mean be a shark in a bad way, but I mean by always keep moving forward in life. Just keep swimming and keep going, because if you stop, you die.
Right on.
Ian,
Yes, sir.
don't forget to have a Merry 62 Mas. Christmas.
All right. I hear you, my brother. Thank you very much for your time, man.